We appreciate each one of you taking time to be here. We're curious. What corner of the globe are you joining us from? At home? At work? Let us know below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Devin Riley adjusted his well-worn Yankees cap. The leather had softened over countless games, much like his patience had developed over years of coaching Little League. He watched his son Jason, now 16 and increasingly distant, half-heartedly collecting equipment after what would become their final game together. "Hey, Coach Riley." Tommy Martinez, one of the younger players, bounded up to him with the endless energy of a 12-year-old. "Thanks for another great season. My dad says you're the best coach we've ever had." Devin smiled, ruffling Tommy's hair. "Thanks, buddy. You got a mean curveball developing there. Keep practicing those drills we worked on." From the parking lot, he could hear the rumble of luxury cars departing. Mercedes, BMWs, and Porsches, their gleaming paint jobs reflecting the setting sun. His Toyota Camry sat apart from them, its navy blue paint showing signs of age, a small dent in the rear bumper from a forgotten parking mishap. Jason approached, his cleats kicking up dust with unnecessary force. "Dad, can you just call an Uber for me? I told you I don't want to be seen in that car anymore. The Camry gets us where we need to go, Jason." Devin kept his voice level, though the words carried the weight of an old argument. "Besides, we're heading to the same place." "That's exactly the problem." Jason's voice cracked with teenage indignation. "Do you know what Trevor said today? He asked if we were having financial problems because you still drive a car from when Obama was president." A flash of something, hurt, perhaps, or resignation, crossed Devin's features before his trader's poker face slipped back into place. Trevor's father also over-leveraged himself on 3 investment properties last quarter. Sometimes the loudest statements about wealth are made by the people with the most to prove. "God, you sound like a fortune cookie," Jason muttered, yanking open the Camry's door. "Mom says you lack ambition." Maybe she's right. The drive home was silent, save for the soft jazz playing on the radio, another of Devin's habits that embarrassed his son. As they pulled into their driveway, the contrast between their modest colonial and the neighboring McMansion seemed particularly stark in the dying light. Inside, Kristen Welch Riley stood in their kitchen, her Pilates-toned figure wrapped in designer workout where that cost more than Devin's entire wardrobe. She was on the phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against a crystal wine glass. "Of course, Charlotte, we'd love to join you at the club this weekend." She paused, shooting Devin a look of barely concealed disdain. "Oh no, Devin's busy. You know how he is with his little baseball team." "Yes, exactly. It's like he doesn't even care about networking anymore." Devin moved past her to his home office, closing the door quietly behind him. The room was modest, like everything else in his visible life, but the computer setup told a different story. 3 monitors displayed complex financial data, each screen protected by military-grade privacy filters. His phone buzzed, a secure message from Elias Bridges, his most trusted colleague at the firm. "Atlas Corp's board meeting just ended. They're still clueless about the positioning we've done through the shell companies. Montgomery's asking questions, but Chin shut him down. We're on track." Devin allowed himself a small smile as he typed his response. "Excellent. Maintain current trajectory. 3 more days until we start Phase 4. He minimized the messaging window as Jason passed by, glimpsing his son's reflection in one of the monitors. The teenager was wearing the Rolex his mother had given him for his 16th birthday, a gift that had made Devin's practical present of a college fund seem pedestrian in comparison. Later that night, after Jason had retreated to his room and Kristen had gone to bed without so much as a good night, Devin sat in his office, reviewing the final details of what would soon become Wall Street history. The Titanium Atlas merger had been 3 years in the making, each move calculated with chess master precision. His phone lit up with another message, this time from June Doherty, his personal attorney. "All trusts are in place. Offshore accounts verified. When this breaks, you'll be untouchable." He thought about the life he'd built, or rather, the life he'd appeared to build. The modest house in a wealthy neighborhood, the reliable but unremarkable car, the department store suits that his wife refused to be seen shopping for. Every choice had been deliberate, every detail crafted to maintain his image as a middling trader who had peaked too early. In reality, Devin Riley had spent the last 3 years orchestrating a takeover so complex it would be studied in business schools for decades. While others flaunted their wealth with sports cars and summer homes, he had been quietly amassing power through a labyrinth of shell companies and strategic investments. His computer pinged with an alert, another piece falling into place. On one screen, a string of numbers reflected the latest trading algorithm success. In 3 days, these numbers would translate into billions of dollars and a fundamental reshaping of the technology sector. A soft knock at his office door interrupted his thoughts. It was Maria, their housekeeper, who had stayed late to finish the laundry. "Mr. Riley," she said softly, "I'm headed home now." "But—" She hesitated, then continued, "I overheard Mrs. Riley on the phone earlier. She was talking about looking at penthouses in Manhattan. She said something about finally moving up in the world." Devin nodded, his expression unchanged. "Thank you, Maria. Drive safely." After she left, he pulled up another screen of data. Among the streams of financial information was a smaller window tracking his wife's recent credit card charges. Bergdorf Goodman, 11 Madison Park, a series of charges at boutique hotels. The dates corresponded perfectly with her spa weekends and charity committee meetings. He opened his desk drawer and removed a worn leather notebook, the only record of his true financial empire. Inside, handwritten notes detailed the elaborate framework he'd constructed. Holding companies nested within holding companies, strategic partnerships buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy, all leading to the ultimate goal, the Titanium Atlas merger. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Kristen complained about their middle-class lifestyle and Jason sulked about the family car, Devin was positioning himself to become one of the most powerful men in finance. The thought brought no joy, only a calm satisfaction in knowing that every dismissive comment, every embarrassed glance, every whispered criticism would soon be thrown into sharp relief. His phone buzzed one final time for the night, a message from the small team of trusted individuals who knew the full scope of his plans. Final positions secured. Asia markets primed. "We are ready." Devin powered down his computers and walked to the window from here. He could see into the neighbors' houses, all massive, newly constructed monuments to conspicuous consumption. In each one, lights blazed from every room as if afraid to let a single corner go dark, afraid someone might miss the display of wealth. His own house sat quiet and understated, its modest appearance masking secrets that would soon shake the financial world. In 3 days, everything would change. But for now, Devin Riley, the unremarkable trader in his unremarkable house, simply turned out his office light and went to bed. The corner booth at Sullivan's Old Town Bar wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find a Wall Street trader and an FBI agent having lunch, which was exactly why Abraham Miner had chosen it. The worn leather seats and perpetual smell of decades-old beer provided the perfect cover for conversations that needed to stay private. Devin arrived precisely on time, wearing one of his signature off-the-rack suits from Macy's. He slid into the booth across from his old college roommate, noting the manila envelope on the table between them. "You're looking well, Abe," Devin said, signaling the waitress for his usual club soda with lime. "Georgetown agrees with you." Abraham ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, his FBI badge safely tucked away in an inner pocket. "Cut the small talk, Dev. We need to discuss something, and you're not going to like it." The waitress arrived with Devin's drink, and they waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. Abraham slid the manila envelope across the table, his movements casual but his eyes sharp. "These were taken last Friday," he said as Devin opened the envelope. "And the Friday before that. And the Wednesday before that." The photographs were high-quality surveillance shots, each one showing a gleaming Ferrari California T in various locations around Manhattan. The car was impossible to miss, candy apple red with custom wheels that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. "Vernon Lang," Devin said, his voice neutral as he recognized the driver. "Quite the upgrade from the Aston Martin he was driving last year. Look at the passenger seat, Dev." Devin flipped to the next photo, and there she was, Kristen, his wife of 18 years, looking radiant in a dress he'd never seen before. Her hair was different, styled in a way that made her look younger, more vivacious. She was laughing at something Lang had said, her head thrown back in a way Devin hadn't seen in years. "There's more," Abraham said quietly. The next series of photos showed Kristen and Lang at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Then entering the Four Seasons. Then shopping at Cartier. In each image, she looked like a different person. Not the dissatisfied wife who barely spoke to him at home, but a woman transformed by excitement and desire. "This isn't just about an affair." Abraham leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "Lang's fund has been on our radar for months. The returns he's posting, they don't add up. We're seeing patterns that suggest major irregularities." Devin took a slow sip of his club soda, his trader's mind already connecting dots that others might miss. "How long have you been watching him?" 6 months officially, but we've had concerns for longer. These guys, Dev, they're good at covering their tracks. They layer everything through offshore accounts, use cutouts for their major transactions. It's like trying to catch smoke. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of Devin's mouth. "And now my wife is involved with him. Look, I know this is personal. Nothing is ever just personal on Wall Street, Abe." Devin's voice remained steady, but his fingers tightened slightly around his glass. "What else can you tell me about his operation?" Abraham glanced around the bar before pulling out another document. His fund, Quantum Edge Capital, has been posting consistent returns of 30% above market average. "Nobody's that good, Dev." "Not consistently. Not in these market conditions." "Have you identified his information sources?" "That's the thing, we can't. It's like he's got a crystal ball. Major market moves, surprise acquisitions, unexpected earnings reports, he's ahead of all of it." Devin studied another photo of his wife entering Lang's office building, her designer handbag matching her shoes perfectly. "Has anyone looked into his client list?" "That's another red flag. Very exclusive, invitation only. Minimum buy-in of 20 million. But here's the interesting part. Some of his biggest clients are connected to companies that have been involved in major market events over the past year. The implications hung in the air between them. Insider trading was nothing new on Wall Street, but this suggested something larger, more systematic. "What does your team think?" Devin asked, though he already knew the answer. "They think he's running a sophisticated insider trading operation, using his social connections, his charm, his lifestyle, all of it to gather information. He gets close to people who have access to market-moving information, uses whatever leverage he can find, including sleeping with their wives," Devin added quietly. Abraham had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Dev, I know this is a lot to process, but I needed you to know. Whatever's going on with Lang, it's big. And now Kristen's involved. Have you considered that might not be an accident?" Devin's question was so soft Abraham almost missed it. "What do you mean?" "Lang's not stupid. He must know about the titanium account I handle. It's one of the largest technology sector portfolios in the market." Understanding dawned on Abraham's face. "You think he's using Kristen to get to you?" "I think Vernon Lang is a man who's used to getting what he wants by taking it from others." Devin gathered the photos and slid them back into the envelope. "The question is, what happens when he targets someone who sees him coming?" The conversation shifted to lighter topics as their food arrived. Abraham's daughter starting college, Devin's baseball team's winning season. But beneath the casual exchange, both men knew that something had been set in motion. As they were leaving, Abraham caught Devin's arm. "Be careful, Dev, Lang's dangerous. If he realizes you know. Don't worry about me, old friend." Devin's smile was genuine, but held something else. A certainty that Abraham had seen before, back in college when Devin would spend nights calculating odds and planning trades while others partied. Sometimes the best position is the one nobody knows you're taking. Outside, the New York afternoon had turned gray, threatening rain. Abraham watched as his friend walked to his modest Toyota, looking for all the world like just another mid-level trader heading back to his unremarkable life. But Abraham knew better. He'd seen that look in Devin's eyes before, and it made him almost feel sorry for Vernon Lang. Almost. The 40th floor of the Titanium Global building offered spectacular views of Manhattan, but Elias Bridges wasn't admiring the skyline. Instead, his attention was fixed on the multiple screens before him, each displaying different aspects of their elaborate plan. The office was dark save for the blue glow of the monitors, the late hour ensuring their privacy. Movement in the Singapore exchange, he reported as Devin entered the room. Lang's fund just took a significant position in Atlas Corp derivatives. Devin loosened his tie. Brooks Brothers, bought on sale 3 years ago, and settled into his chair. Right on schedule. He thinks he's found a pattern. A pattern we created. Elias grinned, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he pulled up more data. The breadcrumbs we've been leaving. He's following them exactly as predicted. The screen showed a complex web of transactions, each one carefully designed to create the illusion of a vulnerable target. For months, they had been feeding Lang's analysts exactly what they wanted to see: a struggling Atlas Corp ripe for a hostile takeover by smaller competitors. "How's our friend at the SEC?" Devin asked, reviewing the latest trading patterns. "Chomping at the bit. The evidence we've been providing through the back channels, it's all there. They just need one final piece to move." Devin pulled up the security feed from Lang's office building on a separate monitor. The timestamp showed 7:45 p.m., and there was Kristen entering through the private elevator access. Her hair was perfectly styled, her dress likely fresh from Neiman Marcus. "Fourth time this week," Elias observed carefully. "She's getting bolder. She thinks she's trading up." Devin's voice held no bitterness, only a calculated certainty. Lang's been filling her head with promises. Penthouses, private jets, a life of luxury that her boring husband could never provide. Does she have any idea about any of this? Devin shook his head, his eyes still on the security footage. Kristen sees what she wants to see. She spent so long being embarrassed by our middle-class lifestyle that she never questioned why I stayed at Titanium when other firms were offering more money, more prestige. A notification popped up on one of the screens. Another trade execution. Lang's fund was now heavily invested in a position that would soon prove catastrophic. "The merger announcement drops in 3 days," Elias reminded him, though they both had the timeline memorized. "Once that happens, everything changes. Lang's fund will be exposed. The SEC will have their evidence. Your wife will learn the true cost of judging books by their covers." Devin pulled up another screen, this one showing a complex network of offshore accounts and shell companies. "Is everything in place with the backdoor tracing?" "Completely," Elias confirmed, bringing up a sophisticated tracking algorithm. "Every trade Lang makes thinking he's got inside information, every move he takes based on the breadcrumbs we've left, it's all being documented. The SEC will be able to follow the money trail like a highlighted roadmap." A soft ping from one of the monitors drew their attention. Another security camera feed showed Vernon Lang himself, walking through the lobby of his building, his designer suit perfectly tailored, his confident stride that of a man who believed himself untouchable. "He's got that look," Elias observed. "The one they all get right before the fall. Pride before the precipice," Devin murmured, watching Lang enter the private elevator where Kristen waited. "He's convinced himself he's too smart to get caught, too connected to fail." The night deepened outside their window, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop to their vigil. Elias pulled up another set of data, the true numbers behind the Titanium Atlas merger. The figures were staggering, even to men accustomed to dealing in billions. "Your son called the office today," Elias mentioned carefully. "Looking for you. Said something about needing money for a new laptop. I heard him tell your secretary that Lang promised to buy him one if you wouldn't." Devin's expression didn't change, but his fingers paused momentarily over the keyboard. Jason's always been easily impressed by displays of wealth. Like his mother, he mistakes flash for substance. "It must be difficult," Elias ventured, watching them both fall for Lang's act. "Do you know what the biggest mistake people make in the market, Elias?" Devin turned to face his colleague, his eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. "They confuse patience with weakness. They see someone moving slowly, carefully, and they assume it's because they can't move faster." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, his wife was laughing at Lang's jokes, probably sharing intimate details about her boring husband's habits, his predictable routines, his apparent lack of ambition. "Let them think they've won," he said, his voice firm. "Sometimes the best revenge is letting people believe they're smarter than you." Elias nodded, understanding the layers within that statement. They'd worked together long enough for him to recognize when Devin was seeing 3 moves ahead of everyone else. The Asian market's open in an hour, he reminded Devin. Want me to run the final verification protocols? Do it, then get some rest. The next 72 hours will reshape this industry, and we need to be sharp. As Elias began the shutdown procedures, Devin remained at the window. Below, a red Ferrari pulled out of Lang's building's parking garage, its engine's roar muffled by the thick glass. He didn't need to see inside to know who was in the passenger seat. One more thing, he said, just as Elias reached the door. Make sure all the documentation is backed up in triple redundancy. When this breaks, there can't be any loose ends. Already done, Elias assured him. Every transaction, every trade, every movement of funds. It's all there, waiting to tell its story. After Elias left, Devin spent another hour reviewing their positions. The plan had been years in the making, each piece placed with mathematical precision. While Lang courted his wife with expensive dinners and empty promises, while his son sneered at his careful lifestyle, Devin had been building something that would change everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Kristen, working late with the charity committee. Don't wait up. He allowed himself a small smile as he typed a response. Of course. Don't work too hard. The irony wasn't lost on him. His wife thought she was being clever, thought she was trading up to a better life, never suspecting that her boring husband was about to become one of the most powerful men on Wall Street. But that would come later. For now, Devin Riley, the unremarkable trader in his sensible suits, shut down his computer and prepared to drive home in his modest Toyota. Let them think they had him figured out. Let them believe their assumptions. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. New York, when Devin Riley's Toyota Camry turned onto his street. He left the office earlier than usual, a nagging feeling drawing him home after the trading algorithms flagged unusual movement in Lang's fund positions. The first thing he noticed was the sound, a deep, throaty purr that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. Then he saw it, a Ferrari California T, its candy apple red paint gleaming like fresh blood in the autumn sunlight. It sat in his driveway, like an exotic animal that had wandered into the wrong habitat, making his modest colonial house look even more understated by comparison. Through the living room's bay window, movement caught his eye. Kristen was there. Her designer workout were replaced by a cream-colored Chanel suit he'd never seen before. She was directing the household staff. Not their regular maid Maria, but new faces, efficient-looking men in dark uniforms, as they carried luggage down the stairs. Behind her, Jason practically bounced with barely contained excitement, his Rolex catching the light as he gestured animatedly. Devin sat in his car for a moment longer, observing the scene with the same detached analysis he applied to market trends. He noted how his son kept glancing at the Ferrari, how Kristen's movements had a theatrical quality to them, as if she were performing for an audience. Then he saw Vernon Lang step into view, and the picture became complete. Lang looked exactly like his surveillance photos, tall, tanned, and immaculately dressed in what was undoubtedly a bespoke suit from Savile Row. He moved through Devin's living room with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his right to be anywhere he chose. Taking a deep breath, Devin stepped out of his Camry. The contrast between his sensible sedan and Lang's Ferrari couldn't have been more stark. It was exactly the kind of moment Kristen had always dreaded at charity galas and school functions. "Oh," Kristen said as he entered, her voice carrying a note of irritation barely masked by social polish. "You're home early." The movers, if that's what they were, paused in their work, creating a tableau of suspended motion. Jason stood frozen on the stairs, a designer duffel bag clutched in his hands, looking between his father and Lang with a mixture of defiance and guilt. Vernon Lang stepped forward, extending his hand with practiced charm. His smile was perfect, too perfect, the result of expensive cosmetic dentistry rather than nature. "Mr. Riley, I believe we should talk." Devin noted the subtle emphasis on Mr., not quite mockery, but close enough to establish the perceived power dynamic. He ignored the offered hand, instead taking in the scene before him. The open suitcases, the carefully packed boxes, the way Kristen seemed to orbit around Lang like a planet caught in a new gravity. "We're leaving," Jason announced, his teenage voice cracking slightly with emotion. He descended the last few stairs, drawing himself up to his full height, still a few inches shorter than his father. "Vernon's going to show us how real successful people live." The emphasis on real was deliberate, a knife twisted with adolescent precision. Kristen didn't even try to hide her smirk, her expression a mixture of triumph and vindication. "I've offered your wife and son an opportunity to experience a different lifestyle," Lang said smoothly, withdrawing his unshaken hand without any sign of embarrassment. "One more, commensurate with their potential." Devin moved further into the room, noting how Kristen subtly shifted to stand closer to Lang. Her perfume, different from her usual scent, mixed with the leather aroma from the new luggage, creating an atmosphere of expensive departure. "And what lifestyle would that be, Vernon?" Devin asked, his voice calm. "The one you show your clients, or the one you hide from the SEC? A flicker of something? Surprise? Concern?" Crossed Lang's face, but his smile never wavered. "I understand this must be difficult for you, Riley. Change often is. But Kristen and Jason deserve better than." He gestured vaguely at the modest surroundings, this middle-class mediocrity. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Jason interjected, his voice carrying that peculiar mixture of condescension and uncertainty unique to teenagers. "Mom says you've had chances to move up, to be successful like Vernon. But you always chose this." He waved at the family photos on the wall, the comfortable but unfashionable furniture, the life Devin had carefully constructed. Kristen stepped forward, her movements precise and rehearsed. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The paperwork will be ready tomorrow. We can do this quietly, dignified, or—" She let the threat hang unspoken. "Of course," Devin replied, his tone unchanged. "You've always cared about appearances, Kristen." She flinched slightly at that, but Lang's hand on her arm seemed to steady her. "The children at Jason's school," she said, her voice tight, "they vacation in St. Bart's and drive Mercedes to class. Their fathers are on boards, make deals, build things. While you coach Little League and drive that car. And now they'll have everything they deserve," Lang interrupted smoothly. "A penthouse overlooking Central Park. Summer homes in the Hamptons and Aspen. Private jets for weekend trips to Paris. The life you couldn't or wouldn't provide." Outside, the Ferrari's metallic paint caught the sunlight, throwing red reflections across the room like splashes of warning. One of the movers approached Lang discreetly, murmuring something about the luggage being loaded. "We're ready," Lang announced, his arm now firmly around Kristen's waist. "Riley, my lawyers will be in touch regarding the arrangements. I'm sure we can handle this like civilized people." Jason hesitated at the door, looking back at his father. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, doubt, perhaps, or a hint of the boy who had once idolized his dad's baseball coaching. Then Lang called out, "Jason, my boy, want to learn how to drive a real car?" And the moment passed. "Coming." Jason's face lit up as he hurried out, not looking back again. Devin watched through the window as Lang helped Kristen into the Ferrari with practiced gallantry. Jason climbed into the back, his expression that of someone entering an enchanted carriage rather than a car. The engine roared to life, a sound engineered to announce wealth and power to everyone within earshot. As the Ferrari pulled away, its red paint blazing against the suburban backdrop, Devin remained motionless in his living room. The house felt suddenly empty, the space filled with the echoes of assumptions and misconceptions. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Elias. Positions confirmed. Lang took the bait. All pieces in place. Through the window, Devin could still see the Ferrari's taillights as it turned the corner, carrying his family toward what they thought was a better life. He allowed himself a small smile as he typed his response. Execute Phase 2. The moment the Ferrari's roar faded into the distance, Devin's demeanor shifted. The passive acceptance vanished, replaced by focused intensity. He pulled out his phone and made his first call. "June," he said when his lawyer answered, "Initiate Protocol Omega." "Yes, now." They've made their move exactly as predicted. June Doherty's voice came through crisp and professional. "The divorce papers are ready. I'll have them filed within the hour." All accounts and assets are positioned as discussed. Are you sure you want to proceed with full protocol? Absolutely. She chose her path when she got into that Ferrari. Devin moved to his home office, activating his secure computer system with practiced efficiency. Have you confirmed the documentation of her recent activities? Everything's logged and verified. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, surveillance photos, it's all admissible. The judge will see a clear pattern of. She paused delicately. Indiscretion. Good. And the offshore preparations? Complete. The moment we file, the sequence will initiate. Her access to all joint accounts will terminate. The trust fund for Jason remains untouched, but locked until his 25th birthday, as specified. Devin nodded, though she couldn't see it. Perfect. Execute immediately. His next call was to Abraham Minor. The phone barely rang once. It's time, he said simply. There was a moment of silence on the other end. You're certain? Abraham asked. Once we move, there's no going back. They just left in his Ferrari, playing their parts perfectly. Devin's fingers flew over his keyboard, bringing up multiple screens of financial data. How quickly can your team move? We're already in position. Surveillance is tracking the Ferrari. They're heading toward Lang's penthouse. Our analysts are standing by to monitor all trading activity. The moment he makes a move based on what he thinks is inside information, he will. Devin interrupted. His ego won't let him resist, especially now that he thinks he's won. Dev, Abraham's voice softened slightly. Are you sure about Jason? He's just a kid who needs to learn that character matters more than cars. Devin's tone remained firm. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important ones. The next hour was a blur of activity. Devin coordinated with his team at Titanium Global, ensuring every piece of their plan was in place. Elias sent regular updates on Lang's funds positions, each one more aggressive than the last, exactly as they predicted. He's moving faster than we expected, Elias reported. The ego play worked perfectly. He's so convinced he's outsmarted you that he's getting sloppy. What's his current exposure? Nearly 80% of his fund is now leveraged against positions that will collapse when the merger announcement hits. He's betting everything on the intel he thinks he's gathered through Kristen. Devin allowed himself a grim smile. And our countermeasures? All set. Every trade he's made thinking he has inside information has been documented and flagged. The SEC will have a clear trail to follow. The afternoon sun was setting when Devin received confirmation that the divorce papers had been filed. June's message was succinct. Papers served at Lang's penthouse. Protocol Omega in effect. He knew what was happening now. Kristen's credit cards were being declined. Her access to their joint accounts was terminated. The carefully constructed financial web he'd built around their life was systematically unraveling, but only her portion of it. His phone buzzed again, a text from Jason. Dad, Mom's cards aren't working. Vernon says it's just a technical glitch. He's taking us shopping anyway. Guess you can't stop us from living better now. Devin read the message twice, noting the bravado masking uncertainty. He didn't respond. Instead, he made one final call to Abraham. Are your teams in place at all major trading hubs? New York, London, Hong Kong, and Singapore. The moment Lang makes his move, we'll have him. Because he's about to make the biggest mistake of his career. As night fell, Devin stood in his empty house, surrounded by the evidence of his family's hasty departure. A forgotten tennis bracelet of Kristen's lay on the kitchen counter. Real diamonds, bought with real money, unlike the life she thought she was climbing toward. His phone lit up with a message from Elias. Lang's analysts are working late. They're positioning for major moves at tomorrow's opening bell. Let them. Devin replied. Sometimes the best trap is the one they walk into willingly. He picked up the tennis bracelet, remembering the day he'd given it to Kristen. It had been their 10th anniversary, back when she still believed in their life together. Back before the allure of Lang's lifestyle had blinded her to what really mattered. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, in the quiet of his strategically modest home, Devin Riley allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd set in motion. Not regret. No, he'd passed that point long ago. This was something else. The calm certainty of knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as defeats. The morning of the announcement dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that made Manhattan's glass towers gleam like freshly minted coins. In his office at Titanium Global, Devin watched the pre-market trading numbers scroll across his screens with the detached interest of someone who already knew the ending to a story. His phone had been buzzing since dawn. Kristen, finally realizing that her financial exile wasn't a technical glitch. He let the calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on the real show about to begin. All teams are in position, Elias reported, entering the office with 2 cups of coffee. Lang's fund started moving aggressively in the Asian markets 3 hours ago. He's dumped another 30% of his holdings into positions that... He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. He's really convinced himself he knows what's coming. Devin accepted one of the coffees, noting it was in his usual modest mug rather than the expensive cups other executives favored. In our counterpositions, locked in. The moment the announcement hits, his fund's leveraged positions will collapse. The SEC will have everything they need. The morning crawled by with the agonizing slowness that precedes momentous events. Devin maintained his usual routine, reviewing reports, attending meetings, presenting the same unassuming image he'd cultivated for years. But beneath the surface, a complex machinery was in motion. At precisely 11:42 a.m., his secure phone lit up with a message from June Diarty. Divorce filing accepted. All assets frozen as requested. She's been trying to reach me all morning. He could imagine the scene at Lang's penthouse. Kristen's growing panic as card after card was declined. Her desperate calls to their bank. The slow realization that her comfortable world was disintegrating. Jason would be watching, learning his first real lesson about the difference between appearance and reality. At 11:55 a.m., Elias burst into the office. Lang's making his move. He's liquidating positions across the board, betting everything on what he thinks is coming. His clients' money, his own holdings, everything. Perfect, Devin murmured. Hubris makes for predictable behavior. At exactly noon, the announcement hit the financial wires. The merger between Titanium Global and Atlas Corp, the largest technology sector deal in history, exploded across every trading screen in the world. The numbers were staggering. $200 billion in total value, a complete reshaping of the industry landscape. The reaction was immediate and violent. Markets surged and plunged as traders scrambled to understand the implications. Phones across Wall Street erupted in a chorus of panic and opportunity. But in his office, Devin sat quietly, watching the carefully orchestrated chaos unfold. His own phone was a symphony of notifications. First, from Abraham, Lang's trying to cover his positions. It's too late. We have everything we need. Then from June, Kristen's lawyer is asking for an emergency hearing. Shall I proceed as discussed? And finally from Jason, Dad, what's happening? Vernon's acting weird. Mom's crying. Please call. Devin stood by his office window, watching the ant-like figures of traders scurrying on the streets below. Somewhere out there, Vernon Lang was discovering that his perfect life, built on stolen information and false confidence, was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. His intercom buzzed. His secretary's voice trembled with excitement. Mr. Riley, there are reporters here from every major network. They're asking about the merger. What should I tell them? Tell them I'm unavailable, he replied calmly. I'll be taking some personal time. He turned to Elias, who was watching the market reactions with professional appreciation. Everything's proceeding exactly as you planned, his colleague said, a note of awe in his voice. Lang's fund is imploding. The SEC is already moving. And the merger? He gestured at the screens, where the numbers told the story of their triumph. Have my plane ready in an hour, Devin instructed. The property on the island is prepared. Everything's waiting for you. But, Elias hesitated. Are you sure about disappearing now? This is your moment. The whole world wants to talk to the mastermind behind the biggest deal in tech history. Devin picked up his coat. Not the expensive one he could now easily afford, but the same modest jacket he'd worn for years. The mastermind behind the deal isn't the story, Elias. The aftermath is. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Vernon Lang's number, but this time it was Kristen. What have you done? Everything's frozen. Vernon's lawyers are saying something about trading violations. Please, Devin, we need to talk. He let that message go unanswered too. Instead, he pulled up the security feed from Lang's office building one last time. The scene was exactly as he'd anticipated. Federal agents moving through the lobby, their badges catching the light. On another screen, financial news networks were running breaking stories about unprecedented irregularities in Lang's fund. Sir, his secretary's voice came through again. Mr. Lang is on line 1. He's quite insistent. I'm sure he is, Devin replied calmly. Please inform Mr. Lang that any communication should go through our respective legal teams. He turned to Elias, who was still monitoring the market's reaction to the merger. The numbers were staggering. Share prices soaring, trading volumes breaking records. And in the midst of it all, the calculated collapse of Lang's carefully constructed empire. Make sure all the documentation is secure, he instructed. Every trade, every transaction, every piece of evidence the FBI needs. It's important that this appears exactly what it is. Lang's own hubris bringing him down. And your family? Elias asked carefully. Devin paused at the door, thinking of Jason's last message. They chose their path. Now, they'll learn where it leads. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, his phone lit up with one final message from Abraham. It's done. Lang's office is secured. His trading records are exactly what we needed. Want me to tell you when we move on him? No need, Devin replied. I'll be watching from a distance. The Toyota Camry waited in its usual spot, its modest presence now almost ironic given the billions that had moved through the financial markets today. But Devin didn't head toward it. Instead, he walked to where a nondescript black sedan waited, its driver standing at attention. The airport, sir? Yes, Devin confirmed, sliding into the back seat. And make sure we avoid the main roads. There will be reporters trying to track down the players in today's drama. As the car pulled away from Titanium Global's headquarters, Devin allowed himself one last look at the building where he'd orchestrated the most significant deal of his career. Not just the merger, though that alone would have been enough to cement his place in financial history, but the careful dismantling of a man who had thought wealth and flash were substitutes for substance. His phone buzzed one final time. Jason again. Dad, please. Everything's falling apart here. Vernon's lawyers are leaving. Mom's hysterical. I don't understand what's happening. Devin looked at the message for a long moment before turning off his phone. The lesson he was teaching his son and wife wouldn't be appreciated now, perhaps not for a long time. But some lessons had to be learned the hard way. The sedan merged into Manhattan traffic, carrying him toward his waiting plane and the private island where he would watch the rest of this drama unfold. Behind him, the carefully constructed trap he'd laid was closing around Vernon Lang, teaching its own lessons about the true meaning of success and the price of underestimating quiet men in modest cars. Gwen Post hadn't always dreamed of being a financial journalist, but sitting in her cluttered office at the Wall Street Journal, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, she knew she'd stumbled onto the story of her career. 3 computer screens displayed different aspects of the Titanium Atlas merger, each number more staggering than the last. You're telling me he planned this for 3 years? She leaned forward, scrutinizing Abraham Minor across her desk. The FBI agent had chosen her carefully. Her reputation for thorough research and uncompromising integrity made her the perfect conduit for this story. 3 years of meticulous preparation, Abraham confirmed, sliding another folder across her desk. Every trade, every shell company, every strategic position, it was all building to this moment. But that's not even the most interesting part. Gwen raised an eyebrow, already typing rapidly. What could be more interesting than the biggest tech merger in history? The fact that he used it to bring down one of Wall Street's most notorious players. Abraham opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos, financial statements, and trading records. Vernon Lang's fund wasn't just cooking the books. It was running one of the most sophisticated insider trading operations we've ever seen. The journalist's fingers paused over her keyboard. Lang? The same Vernon Lang who's been all over CNBC? The market genius who's been posting impossible returns? The very same. And here's where it gets interesting. Abraham spread out a series of documents. Devin Riley didn't just orchestrate the merger. He orchestrated Lang's downfall. Gwen picked up one of the trading records, her trained eye catching the patterns. These positions, Lang was betting everything on inside information he thought he had about the merger. Information he thought he was getting through his relationship with Riley's wife. Abraham's voice held a note of admiration. But every leak, every hint, every breadcrumb of information was carefully planned. Riley and his team spent months creating a trail that Lang couldn't resist following. The office hummed with the sound of computer fans and the distant clatter of the newsroom. Gwen pulled up another screen of data. I interviewed Riley once, 2 years ago, for a piece on up-and-coming traders. I dismissed him as too boring to profile. Driving that old Toyota, wearing department store suits, living in that modest house. That was exactly what he wanted everyone to think. Abraham gestured to another document. While everyone was underestimating him, he was building a network of informants throughout the financial sector. Every time Lang's fund made a suspicious move, Riley's people were watching. Gwen's eyes widened as she read through the evidence. The timing of everything, the merger announcement, the asset freezes, the SEC investigation. It was all choreographed. Like a symphony, Abraham leaned back, watching her process the information. Riley knew Lang's type, the kind of player who mistakes flash for substance. He used that against him. The journalist stood, pacing her small office as she pieced the story together. So when Lang started pursuing Riley's wife, he walked right into the trap. Riley had already documented every aspect of Lang's operation. All he needed was for Lang to make one final, fatal mistake. The falsified trading records. Gwen breathed. When the merger was announced, Lang couldn't resist pretending he'd seen it coming. Created a complete paper trail, showing he had advanced knowledge of the deal. Abraham nodded. Gave us everything we needed on a silver platter. Gwen returned to her desk, fingers flying over the keyboard as she began crafting the story. But why choose this moment to bring it all to light? Why not expose Lang earlier? Because Riley understood something fundamental about men like Lang. Abraham gathered the photos, pausing at one showing the hedge fund manager stepping out of his Ferrari. They have to be seen falling. Their whole world is built on the perception of success. Taking that away in public, that's a punishment worse than prison. The journalist nodded slowly, the story taking shape in her mind. He played the long game, she murmured, typing the phrase that would become the centerpiece of her exposé. While others sought spotlight, he sought substance. For the next several hours, Gwen pieced together the intricate puzzle. She tracked down former employees from Lang's fund, each one eager to share details now that the empire was crumbling. She verified trading records, cross-referenced dates, and built a timeline that read like a financial thriller. One thing I don't understand, she said as Abraham prepared to leave. All these people Riley had feeding him information about Lang's operation. How did he maintain such loyalty? In this industry, information like that is worth millions. Abraham smiled. That's the thing about Riley. He understood that real loyalty isn't bought with money. Every person who helped him had their own story about Lang, about being dismissed, underestimated, looked down upon. Riley gave them something more valuable than money. The chance to prove that character matters more than cars. As the FBI agent left, Gwen stared at her screens, at the mountain of evidence, showing how a quiet trader in an old Toyota had orchestrated one of the most stunning takedowns in Wall Street history. She thought about her own dismissal of him 2 years ago, how she'd been as fooled by appearances as everyone else. Her fingers returned to the keyboard, and she began to write. In an industry obsessed with appearance, where success is measured in sports cars and summer homes, Devin Riley understood a fundamental truth. True power lies in being underestimated. For 3 years, he crafted an image of mediocrity while orchestrating the largest merger in modern financial history. But the merger was only half the story. The newsroom buzzed around her as she worked through the night, crafting a narrative that would shake Wall Street to its core. With each paragraph, she revealed another layer of Riley's intricate plan. The merger, the trap, the calculated revenge that had brought down one of finance's most notorious players. Send me everything you have on the charity gala, She typed in a message to her researcher. I want to know exactly how it played out when the FBI moved in. The response came quickly. You're not going to believe the timing. They waited until he was literally about to receive an award for financial innovation. Witnesses say. Gwen smiled grimly, opening a new document to capture what would become scene 2 of her explosive story. The fall of Vernon Lang was about to become Wall Street legend, and she had a front-row seat to document every delicious detail. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with New York's financial elite. Crystal chandeliers cast their light over designer gowns and custom tuxedos, while waiters circulated with champagne and canapes. At the center of it all stood Vernon Lang, resplendent in a midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo, accepting congratulations for his upcoming Financial Innovation Award. Kristen Riley, she still thought of herself that way, despite the divorce papers, stood at his side, draped in a Valentino gown that cost more than her old monthly mortgage payment. She'd never felt more at home than she did in this world of wealth and privilege. Yet something gnawed at her. The persistent decline of her credit cards, the growing tension in Vernon's voice when he discussed business, the way his smile seemed more forced with each passing day. Jason, looking uncomfortable in his new custom-tailored suit, stared at his phone. Mom, he whispered, Dad's not answering any of my messages, and I still can't access my allowance account. Not now, darling, Kristen hissed through her perfect smile. Vernon's about to receive his award. We can sort out the banking issues tomorrow. But tomorrow's problems arrived early. The first sign was subtle. Men in dark suits entering through the service doors, positioning themselves near every exit. Abraham Minor moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his FBI badge concealed but ready. On stage, the MC tapped his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to present this year's Financial Innovation Award to a man who has revolutionized hedge fund management. His returns have consistently defied market expectations. His investment strategies have become industry legend. Vernon stepped forward, his practiced smile gleaming. He reached for the crystal trophy, his fingers just brushing its surface when Abraham's voice cut through the applause. Vernon Lang, this is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Please step away from the podium. The silence that followed was absolute. Kristen felt the room tilt, her champagne flute slipping from suddenly numb fingers to shatter on the marble floor. The sound seemed to break a spell. Chaos erupted as federal agents moved in from every direction. This is ridiculous, Vernon announced, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. Clearly, there's been some mistake. My lawyers will... Your lawyers have already been provided with the evidence, Abraham interrupted, producing a warrant, including the falsified trading records you created after the Titanium Atlas merger announcement. We have everything, Mr. Lang. Kristen watched in horror as her perfect world imploded. Vernon's face, usually so controlled, crumpled into something ugly and desperate. This is Riley's doing, he snarled, turning to her. Your pathetic ex-husband is the architect of the largest tech merger in history, Abraham finished. And you walked right into his trap. The next hours passed in a blur. Vernon was led away in handcuffs, his protestations of innocence echoing through the plaza's ornate halls. Kristen stood frozen, watching as the elegant crowd that had been fawning over the moments before now drew back, creating a bubble of social quarantine around her and Jason. Mom? Jason's voice shook. What's happening? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with notifications. Her credit cards were declined. Her access to Vernon's accounts was terminated. The penthouse building's management sent a terse email about security protocol changes. They stood on Fifth Avenue at midnight, their designer clothes suddenly feeling like costumes in a play that had ended abruptly. Jason tried his own cards, all declined. Their phones began shutting down as service was cut. What do we do now? Jason asked, his 16-year-old bravado cracking to reveal the scared child beneath. Kristen stared at their reflection in a darkened store window, mother and son, dressed in clothes they could no longer afford, watching their borrowed life dissolve. We need to find a hotel. Something affordable. The word felt foreign on her tongue. They ended up in a modest chain hotel in New Jersey, the only place that would accept cash payment. Their designer luggage looked absurd in the simple room. Their evening were a bitter reminder of how far they'd fallen in a single night. "I should have known," Kristen whispered, sitting on the edge of the standard issue bed. The way Devin never fought back, never argued about money or status. He was always 10 steps ahead. Jason sat beside her, his new phone dark and useless. "Remember when Dad offered to set up that college fund for me? And I said I wanted a Rolex instead." Like mother, like son, Kristen tried to smile, but it came out as a sob. "We chose flash over substance. And now we're in New Jersey," Jason finished, looking around the modest room. "In a hotel that probably costs less than Vernon's monthly car insurance." Through the thin walls, they could hear the sounds of normal life. A family returning late from a trip, children laughing, a TV playing the late news. Somewhere in those broadcasts, their story was already breaking. The fall of Vernon Lang, the exposure of his fraudulent empire, and the quiet triumph of Devin Riley. Kristen reached for the remote, then stopped herself. She didn't want to see it, couldn't bear to watch their humiliation played out on national television. Instead, she opened her designer clutch, counting out the last of her cash. "We have enough for a few days," she calculated, the skill of budgeting long forgotten but desperately needed now. After that, the unfinished sentence hung in the air between them. Jason stared at his Rolex, the watch that had seemed so important just weeks ago. "Maybe we can sell some things? These clothes, the jewelry." "To buy what?" Kristen asked softly. "More expensive things we can't afford? Or maybe—" She paused, the lesson finally sinking in. "Maybe it's time we learned what your father knew all along." They spent that night in their finery, mother and son on a hotel bed in New Jersey, watching their world shrink back to normal size. Outside, the neon sign of the modest hotel buzzed steadily, a constant reminder that sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that teach you the value of simple things. 6 months passed like a slow-motion fall from grace. Kristen found work as a waitress in a diner off Route 17, the only place that would hire her without recent experience. Her designer clothes had been sold piece by piece, replaced by practical uniforms and sensible shoes that would have mortified her former self. Jason had been forced to leave his private school when the tuition checks bounced. The local public school was a daily lesson in humility. No more chauffeur-driven cars or catered lunches. He carried a brown paper bag now, packed with sandwiches Kristen made before her early morning shift. The motel had become their home, each week a struggle to make the modest rent. The manager, a kind-faced woman named Rosa, sometimes slipped them extra towels and turned a blind eye to their use of the laundry facilities after hours. It was on a particularly cold November morning that Jason finally broke. Standing outside the motel in his thrift store coat, he stared at the pay phone as if it might bite him. His iPhone, once his constant companion, had been sold months ago to pay for groceries. With trembling fingers, he dialed the number he still knew by heart. 1 ring. 2. 3. Riley. His father's voice was exactly as he remembered it, calm, steady, unremarkable in its confidence. "Dad?" Jason's voice cracked, 6 months of pride crumbling like autumn leaves. "Dad, please. We have nothing. Mom's working as a waitress. I had to drop out of private school. We can't even afford this motel anymore." Through the phone line, he could hear the subtle sounds of his father's new life. The whisper of papers, the distant hum of success. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken lessons. "I'm sorry you're struggling, Jason," Devin finally said, his voice carrying the weight of carefully chosen words. "But success isn't about Ferraris and penthouse apartments. It's about integrity, patience, and playing the long game." The words hit Jason like physical blows, each one exposing the hollowness of his former desires. "I know that now," he sobbed, not caring who might see him crying at a payphone. "I was so wrong. We both were." "Yes, you were," Devin replied calmly. The lack of anger in his voice somehow made it worse. "Consider this a valuable lesson in judging people by their character, not their cars." As the call ended, Jason remained at the phone, his forehead pressed against the cool metal. Through the window of their motel room, He could see his mother preparing for another double shift, her movements carrying a new humility that would have been unthinkable in their old life. Inside his father's office, high above Manhattan, Devin set down the phone and turned to Abraham Minor, who had been a silent witness to the conversation. "Was it worth it?" his friend asked quietly. Devin smiled, picking up a framed photo from his desk. Not of his family, but of his old Toyota Camry. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's life," he said, studying the image of the modest car that had been both his disguise and his declaration of principles. "It's letting them destroy it themselves while teaching them the value of what they threw away." The view from his office showed a city transformed by his actions. The Titanium Atlas merger had reshaped more than just the technology sector. It had become a parable of substance over style, of patient strategy over flashy displays. Vernon Lang's arrest had sent shockwaves through the financial community, forcing a re-evaluation of what truly constituted success. But Devin's revenge, meticulously planned and perfectly executed, wasn't just about punishment. It was about justice, not just for himself, but for every honest person who'd been looked down upon for choosing substance over show. His story became a Wall Street legend, whispered in corner offices and trading floors, not for the wealth he accumulated, but for the lesson he taught about the true meaning of success. In the end, the modest man in the modest car had revealed a fundamental truth. Real power doesn't need to announce itself with expensive suits and sports cars. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in patience and principle, teaching its lessons not through dramatic declarations or public humiliation, but through the quiet dignity of truth. As Devin sat in his office, the weight of everything he'd accomplished settled around him like a familiar coat. The merger had made him wealthy beyond imagination, but he knew that wasn't the real victory. The true triumph lay in the lessons learned by his son, by Kristen, by a financial world too often seduced by surface over substance. Abraham studied his old friend's expression. The story's everywhere now. Gwen Post's article is being called the financial expose of the decade. Everyone's talking about the quiet trader who orchestrated the biggest deal in tech history while bringing down a Wall Street legend. "Let them talk," Devin replied, his eyes still on the framed photo of his Camry. "The ones who understand will learn the right lessons. The others," he shrugged, "will keep chasing Ferraris." Outside his window, Manhattan continued its endless dance of ambition and acquisition. But something had shifted in the financial world's consciousness. The fall of Vernon Lang and the rise of Devin Riley had become more than just another Wall Street scandal. It had become a reminder that true success isn't measured in possessions or appearances. The old Toyota Camry, now preserved in that simple frame, stood as a testament to a different kind of ambition, one built on patience, integrity, and the courage to be underestimated. In the end, Devin's revenge wasn't just about punishing those who had wronged him. It was about proving that character, not cars, defines a person's true worth. His story echoed through the canyons of Wall Street, not as a tale of wealth gained or enemies vanquished, but as a lesson about the real meaning of success. For every quiet professional choosing substance over show, for every honest worker dismissed for lacking flash, Devin Riley's legend offered a powerful truth. Sometimes the most impressive victories are won by those wise enough to play the long game. The sun set over Manhattan, the towers of power and wealth. In his office atop the Titanium Atlas building, Devin Riley, no longer the unremarkable trader, but still the same man of principle, allowed himself a small smile. He had changed the game not by playing it differently, but by understanding its true rules. Patience, integrity, and the quiet confidence of knowing that real success needs no announcement. It was a lesson written not in the language of luxury cars and penthouse views, but in the humble choice of a man who knew that true power lies not in what you display, but in what you understand. And as his story became legend in the halls of finance, it carried with it a simple but profound truth. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people discover for themselves the cost of judging books by their covers. Epilogue, 10 years later. The diner off Route 17 hadn't changed much in the decade since Kristen Welch first started waiting tables there. The vinyl booths still squeaked, the coffee was still strong enough to strip paint, and the regular customers still left exactly 15% tips. But Kristen had changed. The woman who once sneered at off-the-rack clothing now wore her waitress uniform with a dignity born of hard-earned wisdom. "Your usual, Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her once manicured hands now bearing the honest calluses of decades' worth of carrying plates and wiping tables. The elderly regular nodded, and she filled his cup with practiced efficiency. The small television mounted in the corner was tuned to CNBC, as it had been every day since she started working there. Today, they were running a special retrospective, the Riley Revolution, 10 years after the deal that changed Wall Street. Kristen paused, coffee pot suspended mid-pour, as images flashed across the screen. Vernon Lang, once the embodiment of Wall Street success, being led from the Plaza Hotel in handcuffs. The Titanium Atlas merger announcement that had reshaped the technology sector. And there, looking exactly as she remembered him, Devin Riley standing in front of the newly merged company's headquarters. "That's quite a story," Mr. Henderson commented, following her gaze. "Changed the whole culture of finance, they say. Made people think twice about flashy traders promising impossible returns." Vernon Lang had served 8 years in federal prison before being released last month. His attempt to maintain his image of market omniscience by falsifying trading records had earned him charges of fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The man who once drove Ferraris and owned penthouses now lived in a halfway house in Queens, his assets forfeit, his reputation destroyed. The documentary cut to footage of the old Toyota Camry, now displayed in the lobby of the Titanium Atlas building like a piece of corporate artwork. Below it, a plaque read, "Success is not measured by the car you drive, but by the road you choose to travel." Kristen's shift ended at 3, giving her just enough time to catch the bus to her modest apartment. The building wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it was clean and honest, like her life now. On her kitchen table lay a letter from Jason, her weekly reminder of how much things had changed. Her son had graduated from State University last year, having worked his way through school with part-time jobs and carefully managed student loans. The trust fund Devin had locked until Jason's 25th birthday had taught its own lesson about patience and earning one's way. "Dear Mom," the letter began, in Jason's now mature handwriting. "The internship at the Community Development Bank is going well. It's not Wall Street, but helping small businesses secure honest funding feels more meaningful than chasing status ever did. Dad stops by sometimes for lunch, still drives that new Camry of his, even though everyone knows he could buy the whole block." Kristen smiled, remembering how Jason had once been embarrassed by that car. Now he drove one himself, a used model he'd bought with his own savings. The letter continued. "Speaking of Dad, there's going to be another documentary about the merger and everything that happened. They interviewed me about how losing everything turned out to be the most valuable lesson I could have learned. They wanted to talk to you too, but I told them you probably weren't interested in reopening old wounds." She set the letter down, her eyes drawn to the small newspaper clipping she kept on her refrigerator. It was from 5 years ago, Devin's wedding to Dr. Sarah Chun, a brilliant neurosurgeon who had famously said she fell in love with him because he was the only billionaire she'd ever met who drove a Toyota and actually meant it. The broadcast continued in the background as she prepared her simple dinner. They were interviewing Abraham Minor, now the FBI's Deputy Director of Financial Crimes. "The Lang case changed everything," he was saying. "It wasn't just about one fund's fraudulent activities. It was about the culture of deception, about the way we measure success. Riley showed us that true power doesn't need to announce itself with expensive cars and designer suits." Elias Bridges appeared next, still at Devin's side after all these years. The merger was revolutionary, but its impact on corporate culture was even more significant. "We see it in the new generation of executives. There's less emphasis on flash, more focus on substance. The Riley effect, they call it." The camera cut to Gwen Post, the journalist whose expose had started it all. Her book about the case, The Quiet Trader, had spent months on the bestseller lists and was now required reading at top business schools. "What makes the Riley story compelling isn't just the financial aspect," she explained. "It's the human element. Here was a man whose wife and son dismissed him for lacking ambition, while he was orchestrating the most significant deal of the decade. But more than that, he used that deal to teach a lesson about character that resonated far beyond Wall Street. The documentary showed clips from Vernon Lang's release from prison. The years had not been kind to him. His designer suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing that hung loosely on his frame, his once perfect teeth now showing signs of neglect. He had tried to publish a memoir, but no reputable publisher would touch it. His attempts to re-enter finance had been met with closed doors and turnbacks. Kristen thought about her own journey, from country club memberships to counting tips, from designer boutiques to discount stores. The hardest part hadn't been losing the lifestyle. It had been facing the person she used to be. Each time she served coffee to people who reminded her of her old self, she saw her own past pretensions reflected back at her. The broadcast shifted to recent footage of Devin, still driving a Camry, though a newer model, still wearing suits chosen for quality over label. He had become a legend in finance, not for the wealth he'd accumulated, but for how he'd changed the industry's values. The Titanium Atlas merger had made him one of the richest men in the world, but he lived modestly by billionaire standards. His greatest extravagance was his charitable foundation, which focused on financial literacy and ethical business education. One of its programs provided scholarships to students who demonstrated character over credentials. Jason had refused the scholarship when applying to college, insisting on making his own way. It was a decision that had made both his parents proud, though for different reasons. Kristen was proud because it showed how far her son had come from the materialistic teenager who once scorned his father's car. Devin was proud because it proved the lesson had truly been learned. The documentary ended with a recent interview of Devin in his office. The famous photo of his old Camry still held a place of honor on his desk, but it had been joined by other symbols of a life well lived. Pictures of his new family, awards for corporate ethics, recognition for philanthropic work. Success isn't just about the decisions you make, he told the interviewer. It's about the character those decisions reveal. Sometimes the best lessons come from losing everything you thought you wanted and finding what you actually need. Kristen turned off the television and looked around her small apartment. The space was modest but dignified, decorated with items chosen for meaning rather than show. On her dresser sat a single photograph, Jason at his college graduation, standing between her and Devin. Her son's smile in that photo was genuine, nothing like the forced sophistication he used to affect in their old life. She picked up her uniform for tomorrow's shift, no longer seeing it as a symbol of failure, but as a badge of hard-won wisdom. The tips she earned were honest money, each dollar carrying more real value than all the credit cards she'd once wielded so carelessly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Hey Mom, Dad's foundation is starting a new program for ethical business practices. They want me to help develop it. Still weird sometimes working with him, but in a good way. We're having dinner next week. Want to join?" Sarah's cooking. Kristen stared at the invitation for a long moment. She hadn't seen Devin in person since the collapse of her life with Lang. Their only communication had been through lawyers and later through Jason. But maybe after 10 years, it was time to close that circle too. "Would love to," she typed back, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As she prepared for bed, Kristen thought about the long road from that night at the Plaza Hotel to now. Vernon Lang had offered her what she thought was an escape from mediocrity, only to teach her the true meaning of the word. Devin's revenge had been perfect not because it had destroyed their lives, but because it had forced them to rebuild those lives with better foundations. The next morning, she would put on her uniform and serve coffee to people rushing to their jobs in the city. Some would look through her, just as she had once looked through people she considered beneath her. Others would meet her eyes and treat her with respect, understanding that dignity isn't determined by designer labels. And somewhere in Manhattan, in an office high above the streets where she now lived her humble but honest life, sat the photo of a Toyota Camry, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't the ones that shine the brightest, but the ones that last the longest. The Wall Street legend of Devin Riley continued to grow, not because of the wealth he'd accumulated or the merger he'd orchestrated, but because he'd proven that true success isn't about the possessions you acquire or the image you project. It's about the principles you maintain and the lessons you teach along the way. As for Kristen Welch, former socialite and current waitress, she had finally learned the lesson her ex-husband had tried to teach all along, that there is more dignity in honest work than in borrowed glamour, and more wealth in character than in credit cards. The echo of their choices continued to resonate through the years, teaching new generations that sometimes the quietest victories are the most profound, and the most expensive lessons are the ones that teach you the true value of what you once took for granted. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.